Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the final deadline for submitting the candidacy for the presidential election scheduled for the 7th of September is for today, Thursday at midnight, Algiers time. Algeria has called on the international community to unite to put an end to the Zionist crimes against the people of Gaza and to support the Palestinian people in their quest for freedom. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who was re-elected by a large majority for a second term, has said that the bloodshed in Gaza must stop immediately. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. Algeria has condemned in the strongest possible terms the cowardly terrorist attack near the Imam Ali Mosque in Muscat, Oman, according to a press release from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The same source added that in these delicate circumstances, Algeria assures the Sultanate of Oman, a brotherly country, of its full solidarity and presents its sincere condolences to the families of the victims, wishing a speedy recovery to the injured. In the face of this heinous attack, Algeria reiterates its rejection of all forms of violence and terrorism, reaffirming its full readiness to cooperate with the international community in its efforts to counter this scourge, which runs counter to all human and moral values. Prime Minister Nadir Al-Arbawi has chaired to examine two draft executive decrees relating to the internal prevention of money laundering and the financing of terrorism, as well as presentations relating to the health and agriculture and road safety sectors. Said Bougazi has the details.
During the meeting, the government examined two draft executive decrees laying down the conditions and procedures for the preparation and implementation by regulated entities of internal money laundering and terrorist financing prevention programs, as well as the procedures for inclusion in and removal from the national list of terrorist persons and entities and the resulting effects, which are part of the adaptation of the national legal system to the relevant international tools and commitments. The government also heard and examined sexual communications relating to the creation of new social housing estates in the provinces of the high plateaus and the south in order to guarantee access to decent housing and to improve and diversify the supply of housing. The government then heard the communication on the implementation of the National Road Safety Strategy with the need to strengthen the road accident prevention mechanisms put in place by the public authorities and to introduce new means and tools in line with road safety requirements in order to help reduce road accidents and preserve the safety and security of citizens. In the end, the government heard the presentation on the conclusions of the study day on agricultural investments in the provinces of the south, with particular reference to strategic crops that would help to achieve food security.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has arrived in Accra, Ghana, to take part in the proceedings of the 48th session of the Executive Council of the African Union, scheduled to start today on the instruction of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune. The ministerial meeting will be followed on Sunday by the 6th Coordination Summit between the African Union, the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. The agenda of the ministerial session includes the examining of several financial and administrative issues relating to the internal management of the African Union, issues relating to the partnerships established by the Continental Organization with various international players, its membership of the G20, the continued activation of the mechanisms for joint African action, and the preparation of forthcoming deadlines at continental and international levels. Now, here in Algeria, the final deadline for submitting the candidacy for the presidential election, scheduled for the 7th of September, is for today, Thursday, at midnight Algiers time. Speaking to the media ahead of the last hours of the deadline, the head of the National Independent Authority of Election, Mohamed Sharfi, had this to say.
The regulation had set a 40-day deadline to allow candidates to submit their files and application to any within 40 days of the publication of the presidential decree convening the electoral body. Tomorrow, a new period of competition for the presidency of the Republic of Algeria begins. On this occasion, I know that tomorrow the applicants will provide the authority with proof of the regularity of their candidacy for the presidency of the Republic.
That was the head of the National Independent Authority of Election, Mohamed Sharfi. Representing the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, the Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Brahim Boughali, will take part in the celebration of the 45th anniversary of the triumph of the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua. The celebrations will take place tomorrow in the capital, Managua, in the presence of a number of heads of state and government and their representatives from various countries. As you followed in our top stories, Algeria has called on the international community to unite to put an end to the Zionist crimes against the people of Gaza and to support the Palestinian people in their quest for freedom. Speaking at the UN Security Council's quarterly open debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, Algeria's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Nassim Gawawi, has said the following.
The time for unity is now. Let us put aside difference and work towards an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and a lasting, just solution for Palestine. This solution must be based on international consensus, upholding the Palestinians' right to self-determination and the establishment of their independent state on their ancestral land, a fate that they decide for themselves.
Referring to the forced displacement of people and the destruction of their property by the Zionist army, which enjoys total impunity, Algeria's Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN argued that the Zionist entity must be held to account for the atrocities committed against the Palestinians, deploring the fact that the international community is still slow to act.
The international community appears powerless to stop the relentless killing machine that targets innocent people in the street of Gaza. The suffering of the people of Gaza worsens daily. The Israeli occupying forces displace Palestinians for their homes, destroy their communities, and inflict death with impunity. We call for accountability. I repeat, we call for accountability. It is not an option. It is a must, and it matters. Unfortunately, the international community has yet to implement effective measures to stop these atrocities. This weekend's attack on displaced people in Al-Mawasi and the Shati, safe zones that become dead zones, along with the continued deliberate targeting of UNRWA schools, are clear evidence that Israeli occupation forces bluntly disregard the sanctity of human life.
Mr. Gawawi also said that the Security Council must take the necessary measures in order to avert famine, as the UN reports confirm.
The international community seems paralyzed, held hostage by war criminals in the Israeli occupation government. These people thrive on Palestinian suffering and violate international law and humanitarian norms, using AIDS as a tool for pressure and bargaining. Palestinians now face famine as confirmed by UN reports. This is a war crime. The Security Council must take the necessary steps as outlined in Resolution 2417. The Israeli occupation's violation of international law cannot be addressed with mere statements. It requires decisive sanctions to hold the occupation accountable.
Nassim Gawabi also drew attention to the fact that the latest orders of the International Court of Justice had not been respected by Israel. The toll of the Zionist genocidal aggression against the Gaza Strip has risen to 38,845 people and 89,459 wounded since the 7th of October 2023. According to the Palestinian health authorities, the Israeli occupation army has committed 3 massacres in the last 24 hours in the Gaza Strip, killing 54 people and wounding 95, while hundreds of victims are still under the rubble. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. The non-governmental organization Oxfam has declared that Israel is using water as a weapon for war against the people of the Gaza Strip, where the water supply has fallen by 94% to around 5 liters per person per day. An Oxfam report published today shows that by June 3rd, the Zionist entity had damaged or destroyed an average of 5 water and sanitation infrastructure sites every 3 days since the start of the conflict on the 7th of October. Said Bougazi has more.
The Zionist attacks have resulted in the destruction of 70% of all sewage pumps and 100% of all wastewater treatment plants, as well as the main water quality analysis laboratories in Gaza. The Oxfam report adds that the city of Gaza has lost almost all its water production capacity, with 88% of its water wells and 100% of its desalination plants damaged or destroyed. In total, Oxfam found that the quantity of water available in Gaza has fallen by 94% to 4.74 liters per person per day, a little less than a third of the recommended minimum in an emergency and less than a single flush of water. The head of Oxfam Island, Jim Clarken, said that the Zionist entity had already used starvation as a weapon of war, pointing out that we are now witnessing the use of water as a weapon, which is already having deadly consequences. The Oxfam report also underlines the impact that this lack of drinking water and sanitation is having on the health of the people of Gaza, with more than a quarter of the population falling seriously ill from easily preventable diseases. The NGO said this figure was based on an analysis of World Health Organization data. Water and sanitation specialist at Oxfam, Lama Abdus Samad, noted that the deliberate restriction of access to water is not a new tactic, and that the occupation government has been depriving Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza of safe and sufficient water for many years.
The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen today said that the bloodshed in Gaza must stop immediately, considering that the lives of many children, women and civilians were lost due to the occupation ongoing airstrikes. As Israel intensified its deadly strikes in the Gaza Strip, von der Leyen said that before the European Parliament in Strasbourg that the people of Gaza have become unable to bear it. Von der Leyen was re-elected European Commission President by a large majority for a second term. The UN Chief of Staff, Courtney Rattray, has said that the humanitarian support system in Gaza is on the verge of total collapse, calling again to allow the entry and distribution of emergency aid. Addressing the Security Council on behalf of the Secretary-General, the UN Chief of Staff, Courtney Rattray, has said that nowhere in Gaza is safe.
Almost 2 million people have been displaced, nearly the entire population of Gaza, and many of them multiple times. Nowhere in Gaza is safe. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is a moral stain on us all. International humanitarian law must be respected at all times and by all parties. we must intensify efforts to increase humanitarian aid delivery. International support to these efforts is critical, particularly for the essential work of UNRWA. Amid continued reports of serious abuses against Palestinians in Israeli custody, I reiterate that all detainees must be treated humanely and those held without lawful cause must be released, and this terrible war must end.
Mr. Rattray also expressed alarm about the situation in the occupied West Bank, subject to high levels of violence by the Israeli occupation forces and settlers as well. He also said that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the Zionist policy in the occupied West Bank, which represents a stake in the heart for the two-state solution. Meanwhile, the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, Mohannad Hadi, has said that in Gaza, the issue of lack of public order is a priority.
In Gaza, there are a set of challenges. I've never been in a place where everything is a challenge or everything is a priority there. So if you speak to my UN colleagues and ask them to prioritize the work, they will tell you that's not possible. Everything is a priority. Likewise, there is a challenge on every front. Right now, the main challenge we have is the public order. We need to make sure that the working environment there is safe enough to deliver with accountability to our staff and accountability to the affected population. So this is the main challenge we have today. Of course, there are the other challenges of logistics, access, but if you want to know, the number one thing we are focusing on is the issue of lack of public order.
Regarding the situation in the West Bank, Mr. Hadi expressed concern about the increasing violence waged by the Israeli settlers, saying that efforts must be deployed to avoid turning the West Bank into Gaza.
On the West Bank, I've visited more than one refugee camp. I visited Tulkarem, I visited Jericho. Definitely we have concerns about the settler violence, and I've said more than one time, we follow the SG instructions that yes, all eyes are on Gaza, but we shouldn't wait for the West Bank to become another Gaza. I've met many people in Tulkarem camp. We had discussions with them. I went to UNRWA schools. I spoke to many girls now, many girls who are students. They told me their daily suffering. How is it difficult to live in a refugee camp? So the West Bank is a huge concern for us, and we shouldn't wait until the West Bank becomes another Gaza.
That was the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, Mohannad Hadi. Now, the International Court of Justice will deliver its opinion tomorrow, Friday, on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of the Israeli occupation in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Al-Quds. The details in this report by Said Bougazi.
According to the text, a public session will be held at the Peace Palace in The Hague, where the court has its premises, during which the president of the court will read out the advisory opinion. On 30th December 2022, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the resolution requesting the ICJ to give an advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the Zionist occupation of the Palestinian territories since 1967, on how the policies and practices of the Zionist entity affect the legal status of the occupation, and on the legal consequences that arise from this status for all states and the UN. Last February, a record number of 52 countries presented arguments before the Hague Court on the legal ramifications of the actions of the Zionist entity in the Palestinian territories. The main judicial body of the United Nations has a dual mission. On the one hand, to settle in accordance with international law legal disputes referred to it by states, and on the other hand, to give advisory opinions on legal questions submitted to it by the UN bodies and institutions of the United Nations system duly authorized to do so.
King Charles III of the United Kingdom has said that the new British government will work for peace in the Middle East and for a two-state solution. The new executive will play its part in seeking to secure long-term peace and security in the Middle East and is committed to a two-state solution, Charles III said in a speech at the opening of Parliament. On Sunday, the new British Foreign Minister called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during a visit to the region. The world is celebrating the Nelson Mandela International Day. The day is observed each year on the 18th of July, Mandela's birthday. The day was officially declared by the United Nations in November 2009, with the first UN Mandela Day held in 2010. Asia Bikar has this special program for you on Nelson Mandela International Day.
I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all nations live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
This year's celebration is held under the theme "It is still in our hands to combat poverty and inequality." The theme resonates deeply with Mandela's lifelong commitment to social justice. On the occasion of the Nelson Mandela International Day, the UN Secretary General has addressed a message in which he urged everyone to perform 67 minutes of public service on Nelson Mandela International Day, 1 minute for each year he fought for justice.
Nelson Mandela showed us the extraordinary difference one person can make in building a better world. And as the theme of this year's Nelson Mandela International Day reminds us, combating poverty and inequality is in our hands. Our world is unequal and divided. Hunger and poverty are rife. The richest 1% are responsible for the same quantity of planet-wrecking greenhouse gases as 2/3 of humanity. These are not natural facts. They are the result of humanity's choices, and we can decide to do things differently. We can choose to eradicate poverty. We can choose to end inequality. We can choose to transform the international economic and financial system in the name of equity. We can choose to fight racism, respect human rights, combat climate change, and create a world that works for all humanity. Every one of us can contribute through actions large and small.
At an informal meeting to observe Nelson Mandela International Day, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, said that combating poverty and inequality is in our hands. Reading a statement on behalf of the UN Secretary General at the informal plenary meeting in New York to celebrate Nelson Mandela International Day, Amina Mohammed said Nelson Mandela showed us the extraordinary difference one person can make in building a better world.
Nelson Mandela showed us the extraordinary difference one person can make in building a better world. And as the theme of this year, Nelson Mandela's International Day reminds us, combating poverty and inequality is in our hands. Our world is unequal and divided. Hunger and poverty are rife. The richest 1% are responsible for the same quantity of planet-wrecking greenhouse gases as 2/3 of humanity. These are not natural facts. These are the result of humanity's choices, man-made choices. And we can decide to do things differently. We can choose to eradicate poverty. We can choose to end inequality. We can choose to transform the international economic and financial system in the name of equity. And we can choose to fight racism, respect human rights, combat climate change, and create a world that works for all humanity. Every one of us can contribute through actions large and small.
She cited what late Mandela said in his biography by saying that poverty is not an accident, but it is man-made. She deplored that actions have not been enough as an additional 23 million are pushed to extreme poverty. She also blamed the choices taken by government leaders that led to these alarming figures situations.
What strikes me in the Secretary General's message is the focus on choices. That the challenges today are because of choices that were made yesterday, and the freedom to reverse them. Of the challenges humanity faces at this moment in time, none are greater than the eradication of poverty, right to justice, and a life of dignity. Nelson Mandela wrote in his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, that poverty is not an accident, like slavery and apartheid. It is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. but perhaps I can add something to this. He did say man-made, so with more women in leadership, perhaps we really can make the difference. Yet our actions until now have not been enough. According to the Sustainable Development Goals report just released weeks ago, an additional 23 million people were pushed into extreme poverty in 2022, and over 100 million people were suffering from hunger than just 5 years ago. For the first time this century, per capita GDP growth in the world's most vulnerable nations is slower than in advanced economies. In many ways, inequality is deepening. The news is not all bad. We are making strides on boosting renewable energy, we are getting more people online, and more girls are completing school. Yet overall, we know that we're failing to deliver on the promise and the hope of the Sustainable Development Goals. We can blame the lingering impacts of COVID-19, escalating conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and growing climate chaos. But if we look deeper, it is our choices that have led us here.
Nelson Mandela had a special relationship and very close ties with Algeria, his second homeland, the former South African president having been deeply imbued with a history of Algerian resistance against French colonialism, from which he drew much inspiration in his fight against the apartheid regime in his country. The relationship between Nelson Mandela, also known as Madeba, and Algeria was close, almost fusional. According to analysts, it was no coincidence that Nelson Mandela, released from prison in February 1990, after 27 years in the apartheid jails, devoted his first foreign visit to Algeria. Nelson Mandela's grandson talked about his grandfather's relation with Algeria.
The founding father of our young nascent democracy, who in the early 60s took upon a journey to come into Africa, visited 16 countries in a passport, an Ethiopian passport that was issued by the Emperor Haile Selassie, and he was able on his journey to come to Algeria and receive his military training here. For us, it is really a great honor and a privilege to be able to undertake a journey in Madiba's footsteps. My grandfather regarded Algeria to be his second home. This was a home for him that ushered in a new dawn. My grandfather's generation of 1944 was able to establish the ANC Youth League, led by the then Pan-Africanist leader Anton Lembede. In founding the ANC Youth League, they had a clear approach to it, that they wanted to end the passive resistance of signing petitions against an oppressive and a brutal regime. Therefore, they adopted a militant approach where they would be able to engage with the apartheid regime directly in acts of protests and defiance. So when my grandfather came in to Africa seeking to mobilize support for our struggle for liberation, he came to Algeria to receive his military training as the commander-in-chief of Umkhonto we Sizwe. But what was important on that visit is the lifetime friendship he was able to achieve.
Nelson Mandela International Day is observed annually on his birthday, July 18th, and people everywhere are encouraged to volunteer for 67 minutes, either in their communities or virtually. This year's theme is "It is still in our hands to combat poverty and inequity."
Together, they represent an active, vigorous Hall of Fame. A Hall of Fame that goes out into the world, spreading hope, inspiration, and hope. Their legacy will be an international community where the rules of the game are the same for everyone, and behavior is guided by fair play and good sportsmanship. I ask you now to rise and join me in commending the original inductees into the World Sports Academy Hall of Fame.